Hey, everybody. Welcome to the third session on Christmas with the Center for Holy Land Studies. And today I have Dr. Jeffrey P. Garcia, who is an amazing and brilliant scholar. He's one of my favorite humans on the earth. Brilliant, loves the Lord, great combo. So I have been able to travel quite a bit with Dr. Jeff to Israel and other lands of the Bible, and he is an amazing teacher, professor, guide, all the things in Israel and other lands of the Bible. He travels with us quite a bit with the Center for Holy Land Studies. We're so thankful to have him as part of our team. If you've ever been on a trip with him, you'll understand. And after listening to him today, you'll also understand. And I'd like to add one more thing, that if you ever want Jeff to come and speak at your church, teach, do any of the things, and sometimes Jeff holds online courses as well, and I'll give links to Jeff's information in the e-blast that goes out with this video. You are welcome to contact the center or Jeff directly, and we would be happy to connect you with him. I know that he has visited churches in the past and done a lot of teaching. He's taught at a few of our AG schools, just doing some adjunct for them, along with his full-time positions he's had in other locations. And Jeff, you could tell them how brilliant are if you want to, but I can just do that for you. So Jeff is great, everybody. Say hello to the people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that introduction. I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to this.
We're just so thankful for you. And I think when we're in Israel together, you and I talk about who's going to teach this topic. So yes, we tag team sometimes. And it's Luke 2, which I think we both agree this is a very important passage to go through regarding the birth of Jesus. And usually we get to teach it while we're standing in Shepherd's Field, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I think this is central to what we call Christmas. It's on all the Christmas cards. It's under all of our trees. If you've been to Bethlehem, you have a nativity scene that is based on this text, made of lovely olive wood.
Yeah,
and
that's
depending
right.
how much you were wanting to spend, you got either a giant one or a small one.
Or a little one.
Or a little one. Some people, watching this video have nativity scenes in front of their house, and all of those scenes that we have traditionally for thousands of years now are based on what happens in this particular text.
Yeah.
As well as the one in Matthew where you have the Magi.
Right.
But the shaping out of, what we look at as like the barn and the manger.
You already went there.
Yeah, the shepherds and all that other stuff. A lot of it comes out of how we interpret the small numbers of passages at the beginning of Luke 2.
Yeah.
So it's central. It's what we look at when we get up and look at Christmas and what we celebrate. And there's some important tidbits in it that we miss out on, that you and I share, because we've talked about this text and we've taught about it, and we've taught about it in an area where you can start pointing out, well, this is here and this is there. But unfortunately, not everybody has that opportunity. So it's fun to sort of unpack this a little bit.
It is. I'd say fun is a great word. We're going to use that one. Yeah. I've already had some people email me this Christmas season who we took last year when we were both on the same trip together. And they were grateful and thankful because now they're looking at it with a whole new context. And I think context is everything in many regards as to how we discuss passages. I would also say it's probably one of the times where we get the most questions, but they're not bad. It's not like negative. It's inquisitive and help us understand this more, because I think as I've gone through this passage, the more I understand it and study it, the more amazing it is, the more brilliant God is, the more powerful the message is. And so I think that's what I'm hoping we come out with today. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to fire a few questions your direction and let you go. So Jeff, I guess it all starts with Joseph and Mary.
It does.
It does. And so why would God choose those two people as far as who are going to be the parents raising Jesus? I don't think we always think about, people actually raised him. He was human also. So why Joseph? Why Mary? What was it about them that made them the possible parents of Jesus?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting is that when we talk about the nativity scene, I think that's about all the talking of Joseph and Mary that we do in our liturgy, in our tradition. We put them up for Christmas and then we take them down, and we don't often consider who they were. And the question I always like to begin with is, God chooses to do this amazing thing in the fullness of time and incarnate himself in a limited, vulnerable place, a human body. And he's born a child, and all of us know that have had children or grandchildren around. They're cute, they're wonderful, but they're extremely vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And then the expectation is that the parents of that individual, the caretakers of that baby, will then be responsible for making sure that they are safe from those vulnerabilities being exploited. And you wonder, so if God chooses to incarnate himself in the fullness of time, who is he going to put himself with? Who is baby Jesus going to be put with? Is it just sort of a roll of the dice? Anybody who wants to incarnate God, here you go. And what we find is that there are indications in the Gospels that Mary and Joseph were individuals who were very pious towards the God of Israel, which means that they were humble servants who desired to observe the commandments of God. And let's just say, as in any part of history, not everyone that's part of society is going to maintain the same level of piety, right? So there are those in the first century who are just sort of, they often discuss the fishermen not being incredibly pious, let's say. No offense to the disciples. But we see that there's indications of Mary and Joseph really sort of desirous to observe the commandments and do the things that God has required in the Torah. And the couple examples that we get that I love is one, of course, early in Luke, and there's some discussion about who says this, but Mary is presented early in Luke saying the Magnificat. It's this thing that resembles very closely the song of Hannah when she is born with child. And it suggests to us that Mary has some kind of understanding of scripture, right? And that she understands the way God moves in the world, and God blessing her and God blessing her womb and this incredible thing that's going to happen. But she understands it via the gate of scripture, right? Which means that she understands scripture. She also participates in a first century rite called the redemption of the firstborn, and does so at the temple, which at the time period wasn't necessarily required. She could have just done it where she was, but she goes to the temple and participates in this rite called the redemption of the firstborn for Jesus, because he is the first one to come out of her womb. And again, that indicates to us that she's not taking anything short. Like, I don't have to go to Jerusalem, so I'll do it wherever I can do it. It's okay. Let's take the easy way out.
And she did it right away.
And she did it right away.
Yeah.
She could have waited. With Joseph is a little bit harder because we have less information about him, right? Like at the end of Jesus' life, Mary's there and there are people mourning and his brothers are there and so on and so forth. But Joseph is not there. Once Jesus becomes an adult, Joseph seems to be gone. We don't know what happened to him, actually. Most scholars presume that he was of older age when him and Mary got married, got betrothed, and that he may have died before Jesus reached adulthood. That's speculation, but it's probably the best speculation that we have. Now, Joseph, when the whole situation happens with Mary, decides that, well, he decides based on the influence of an angel, which is always fun, um, to not put Mary to shame. And it describes him at some point as a righteous man.
Mhm.
And we often jump over that description, but that description is important because it doesn't simply mean that he is one who desires to observe the commandments in a first century setting. It can mean that he is the kind of person that would have not put Mary to shame. In other words, he would have been just to her in a situation. But also in Hebrew, tzaddik in the first century also means an individual who studies the scriptures, right?
Mhm.
And the studying of the scriptures in the first century was a choice. If you wanted to study the sages, you would make that choice. It wasn't something that was um not everyone was responsible for that. So
Mhm.
to be a person who wanted to study the scriptures, this is indicating something about that individual, right? Um and it suggests to us that Joseph and Mary um were given Jesus for this particular reason. That as they raised Jesus in Luke 2, at the end of Luke 2 speaks about him growing in wisdom, right?
Yeah.
Because he's growing from a child into a teenager into an adult. Um, that they're given Jesus because God knows that these are the people who are pious, who are going to raise him, both in the ways of the world, their work, the agriculture, the carpentry, the whole thing,
Mhm.
but also are going to instill in him by action, by example, by talk, the ways of God
Mhm.
and the ways that Jesus will, when he begins his earthly ministry, he begins to follow.
Right.
And that's an important foundation. And we often forget that, but the nativity reminds us that we are dealing with divinity coming into humanity. And that humanity in all its various incredibleness and greatness is also very real in its vulnerability and its littleness.
Yeah.
And that aspect of Jesus' existence is of equal importance in terms of who his parents are, how he lived, where he was born, as is the other side. And the nativity reminds us to consider the human side.
I love it. Sometimes we have to slow down a little and read between the lines sometimes. I
Yes.
know that we've had opportunity to study this a long time and do it, but just to remind people, there's a lot more there often than what we see when we're just zooming right through. Even as far as who Joseph is, what his job was, he's not just a carpenter. God definitely chose these two people for the parents of Jesus to raise them and help him grow in wisdom.
Yeah.
This was not a happenstance event. So thank you for that slow down part. That it's so important to understand. So as far as Joseph and Mary, and there's so much we could actually talk about. Like it's hard to miss. Mary is so young, like 13 or so years
Yeah.
old, probably. Joseph is older than Mary, likely much older. Living in Nazareth, which was a small village. We can see first century homes there when we visit still,
Yeah.
cave homes underneath the church. And what I love about Mary, just a quick aside, is that she did say, well, how's this going to happen? But it wasn't the same as like a laughter. It was,
Right.
okay, I am the servant of the Lord. Let it be. I mean, for a girl her age, to me, that shows great piety and
Yeah.
love for God. So even that in itself, and then Joseph saying, I can put her away quietly, also shows that he's a good man, that he
Yeah.
cared about it. And then the angel came and, dropped the mic. So didn't matter so much, but it's just really quite something. So is there anything else you want to talk about with Nazareth, or do you want to begin our journey?
I mean, I think Luke 2 sort of jumps out with the impetus for the journey, right? The
Right.
whole, Rome is around and we're going to have a census.
And a census
And
didn't take 5 minutes, by the way.
no, this is I don't know how many months. process
Years. Yeah.
of making sure. I mean, because at the end of the day, the census is going to be for Rome to figure out who they're going to tax and how much they're going to tax.
Yeah.
You would imagine any government or city or empire that runs off the collection of taxes is going to make sure that they dot their I's and cross their T's.
Yep.
And
It's all about the money.
exactly. And as a result, I mean, Joseph and Mary are living in Nazareth. As far as we know of first century Nazareth, it's not really a major cosmopolitan area, right?
Right.
If you could even use that word for antiquity. I mean, compared to the bigger cities like Sepphoris and Tiberias, Nazareth, as far as we know from first century remains, is not very big. It's not backwoods. I want to make sure that people don't think that Jesus is growing somewhere, being raised somewhere that's sort of what we call in the sticks.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the jungles of the Galilee.
Yeah.
There was this young man named Jesus.
Yeah, I'm glad you made that point, actually.
Yeah, Nazareth is it's not a big village, but it is interconnected with very large cities where the teacher of the day would study. Sepphoris is huge for that. Later on, it's going to be Tiberias. These are where the rabbis and the teachers of God's law and his commandments are gathering. And if Joseph is playing a role in that, then being in a small city of Nazareth means they're just living in the suburbs. That doesn't mean anything about the level of their education. As a matter of fact, Joseph's own job as a tectone, being an artist and a mason, would require him to have some level of education. As far as we can tell from Jesus, he also was educated. Although we don't have stories of that in the Gospels, it doesn't mean that there isn't evidence for that. So Nazareth is small, and the census requires apparently that Joseph return back to his ancestral home, which is Bethlehem, which is about, as you know, a 10-minute ride from Jerusalem.
Yep.
Very close to Jerusalem. And
no, Sepphoris is just like over the hill from Nazareth too.
Yeah,
so
very close.
When Jeff is talking about Sepphoris in the suburbs, it is just right over the hill. So Joseph probably went and worked there, right? I mean, logically.
Yeah, sure. No, there's as far as we know, there's the Roman city that we have there of what remains can be dated back to the first century, indicates that you would have had any number of masons and people like Joseph there, to participate in creating the various things you create. But also, if Joseph is someone who's pious, the mixed Greek Jewish culture of Sepphoris may not have been very attractive to him.
Right.
So it may have been good for, shopping in the market, for Shabbat, working there during the week, but to live there would have been a different story probably for Joseph.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes back to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is not much bigger than Nazareth.
Right.
As far as we can tell. It also is a small village.
On the outskirts of a bigger city.
On the outskirts of a bigger city.
Yeah.
And within walking distance of that same city, of Jerusalem, I mean. They're both, I mean, I'm not sure you would call them suburbs. Maybe they're
it's a nice way to picture it.
Yeah, it is, right?
A little ways away.
Yeah, a little ways away.
Yeah. So you have Joseph and Mary going to Bethlehem, and you said because it was Joseph's ancestral home, which means he has family there, presumably, and maybe owns some land there. We're not sure. I'll let you go there.
I mean, we're not sure. We're not sure exactly what Joseph has there, right?
Yeah.
But he has to have something. Because that's where he's going to be counted, and that's where his taxes are going to be taken from.
Right.
So it could be anything, inherited land. It could be family land. It could be, I mean, it's probably private land, but we know that Rome taxed private land as well as public land. And he's returning because he's compelled to as a result of this census. Right. And when he returns to Bethlehem, the likelihood and anyone has known this who's traveled to the Middle East, or anyone knows this who the holidays are coming up and you travel to see your family, that when you travel to that place, let's say for a reason, like to give gifts,
Right.
that family members are going to come. They want to see you. Maybe you haven't been there for a while. So they get word that you're coming back. So family's going to show up. His family's there. Now, what's interesting is that this is where the tradition starts. It's the journey.
Yeah. Okay. So are we going to talk about them on their way? Jeff
We
was married
could.
9 months pregnant on a donkey, knocking
So,
on doors, going, "Somebody let me in." Like all the
so this
Christmas
is the this
songs.
is the
Yep, this is where you're gonna go there.
this is the most famous nativity card, is Joseph with a pregnant woman on a donkey walking into Bethlehem. And it's an important tradition, but it is a tradition.
Yes.
And by that I mean, let me be clear about that. We have nothing in any of our gospel texts that tells us that this is what's happening. In other words, that like Luke 2, which is where we get sort of this workup of Joseph and Mary going into Bethlehem, there is nothing that tells us that they're riding a donkey into Bethlehem and she is, what is it, 37 weeks? And she's about to go into labor, and right on the donkey, right before they get to the city that says, "Welcome to Bethlehem," the water breaks as well as everything else. It just
So
doesn't.
I lived in Israel while I was pregnant. So I'm not Mary. Okay, we all know. But if you put me on a donkey 9 months pregnant, so help me.
No,
But
they would have been.
they were moving. They were moving for a long time. You've got to think the donkey is there to carry their
Yeah,
goods because they
absolutely.
are actually moving. So um, we're not wrecking anything. I just feel like it's a, like I said earlier, a special story, a narrative when you actually try to get a clearer picture.
Yeah,
But
no,
have you tell it so they can ask you all the questions.
I mean, I find it generally. I mean, earlier I was watching a show on antiquity. I don't think it has to do with the land of Israel, but some ancient thing in Rome or somewhere in the ancient world, maybe Egypt, was talking about donkeys, and that we get the impression that people are riding donkeys like they're riding Arabian horses
Yeah.
when they're moving, and that this is just not the case. The donkey is your stubborn pack animal, and if they're going from Nazareth to Bethlehem, um, they're probably there for a while. I mean,
Yeah.
when we have the killing of the innocents by Herod later on, in the Gospel of Matthew, it's everyone 2 years or younger,
Yeah.
which means that Jesus is at least two, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, which means that they're there for a while.
Yeah.
If she, in our mind, I think sometimes we might have the image of Mary walking in with baby Jesus to Bethlehem because she's so pregnant when she shows up just
Yeah.
outside the city. But they're still there for a while, which means they're taking a lot of their stuff.
Yeah.
Um, on the way down, we're talking about a 3 to 5 day walk, depending how they walk. It could be up
Right.
to 7 days, depending how they walk. Some portions of it very, very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Again, depending how they come down from Nazareth. Um, and the one thing that we miss that I love is that when Mary's going to go into labor, right? It says, and while they were there,
Yeah.
right?
That
Now,
little
our Yeah, like now our tradition, like you said, is you have the two types, I call it, the nice one and the mean one. And they're both based on the innkeeper. The nice one is they go knocking on the inn, and the innkeeper opens up and just says, "Oh, we're fully booked up. I'm sorry, you can't stay here, whatever." And then we have the angry innkeeper who slams the door, furious that they would come to get some kind of room, some place to stay, and tells them, the last option in both those stories for the nice innkeeper, the mean innkeeper, is to end up in the barn, right?
Yeah.
Which in our mind, of course, the barn means that he's been thrown to the side,
Right.
right? He's been thrown wherever,
Yep.
and that's where he's going to be born. But that's not actually how ancient people lived.
Right.
The first thing we're missing, which I love, is that if you read Luke 2, and anyone who watches this, read Luke 2, at least from chapter 1 to chapter 7 for your nativity devotion. There's no innkeeper. There's no innkeeper. There's no. Now, we do have an innkeeper in Luke. Later in Luke 10, the
Yeah.
story of the Good Samaritan, we have an innkeeper. And this is when the Samaritan takes up the individual who's half dead, takes him to an inn and actually speaks. And we have the word innkeeper
Right.
in Greek. Here, we do not have that word. We do not have that person.
But Jeff, what about where it says, I'm going there, there was no room in the inn? Now, I know that those are two different words. So can you explain that for everyone?
Yes.
Thank you.
So words are an interesting thing, as we know, and
interpretations of words and text.
Interpretations of words.
Yes.
We know, first of all, there's no innkeeper, right? So let's start with that. And let's say that it says in verse 6 that while they were there, the time came for her to be delivered.
So you're saying they were there already, probably for a while.
Right. So the question is, the follow-up question is, if they're there, where are they? Do they have a long rental in the barn? Probably not.
And it also shows it, because it says while they were there, they weren't running around banging on doors. They were there. They had a set place they were living. So talk to me about where they were living and how it's different from what our tradition has told us.
So if we could try to paint a picture about what we have, they're traveling to the city of Joseph's family. Joseph's family is probably going to receive word that they're coming and that there is some excitement. Perhaps they're in a caravan, and part of that caravan gets to Bethlehem before they do, because they're obviously going to travel with care because Mary is pregnant.
Yeah.
Right. And they hear about Joseph coming, and they hear about his betrothed, and at some point likely becomes his wife. We're not sure in between when that happens. That she's with child. So everyone's scattering around, like, Joseph's coming back. He's going to be counted in the census.
Yeah, they're excited.
Very excited. It's a new baby joining the family. The family's growing.
We're so excited.
Have to do something. Now, it doesn't tell us that while they were reaching Bethlehem, this is while they were there.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, if I connect the dots between all those things, there is the likelihood is that they are staying with family. This is where he's going to get counted in the census. He's not going to be counted in the census because there's nothing there that he is responsible for, right? There was nothing there he was responsible for. There'd be no reason for them to go to Bethlehem.
Right.
Because you can't tax zero. He has to have something in Bethlehem, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
So he's probably staying with family. Now, as far as we know, in small villages, the houses were also small, right? So let's say for most houses, you're going to have very small quarters, right? You're probably going to have a couple rooms on the first floor. Those rooms are usually used for agriculture and other things. And you're probably going to have an upper floor for sleeping, maybe even sleeping on the roof, depending on during the summer months, you probably sleep on the roof. And it may be, and we see this also in Israel now, it may be that the family decided, if Joseph is coming back, he's going to be with us for a while. Let's build a room for them. Let's build a room for them to stay. And this is where they're going to live while they are in Bethlehem. Now, which
is still common in Middle Eastern cultures to you still have rebar out the top of your house, because when you get married, you build another
The
room.
expectation is when the son gets married, he moves on the
Come
top,
home.
and so on and so forth. And this is why we have, when I first went to Israel, I thought all these houses were undone. Why haven't they
Yeah.
completed them? It's like, no, that's not what's going on. What's going on is preparation for future generations.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to do this same thing that happens in Middle Eastern culture now, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're going to build this room for them. Now, the question is, what do you call this room, right? What do you call this room they've decorated out for Joseph and Mary? And the Greek word that comes close to saying the place where they were going to stay is this Greek word called kataluma. Now, you don't need to remember the Greek word. No one needs to remember the Greek word.
But you
But you
sound
should
cool
know,
if you
you sound cool if you do.
do.
You should know that lying behind that word in Greek is the word kataluma, right? So you could easily read where it says, after they lay him in a manger,
Mm-hmm.
it says, because there was no place for them in the place they were staying.
Yeah.
Okay.
So rather than in, if we're looking at the Greek behind that word, there are several Bible versions that are now changing that to guest room
Yes.
or
Yes.
or something else even. So, but behind that word is
So we have so when we see in, we think of a place to stay.
right.
And it goes back to our tradition. Oh, this is them knocking. There's no place in an inn. What we think is motel, hotel,
Right.
right? We have this word in Greek in Luke 10.
The
Now
word
that Greek
for
word
hotel, motel.
is pondechion, if you want to get
Right.
really fancy with it.
Yeah.
And that word does mean a motel, hotel, place that you pay to stay.
Right.
The word here in this context does not mean a place that you pay to stay.
Right.
Okay. Contextually, if we were to read this closely, I think it's easy to say, or better to translate that there was no place for them in the guest room where they were staying already. Now,
Right. No place to have a baby.
right. And that's the key, right? So if we start already in Luke 6 saying, while they were there, she goes into labor,
Mm-hmm.
right? I guess this involves a little bit of common sense. Let's just say that when a woman gives birth, she needs space. She needs good air to breathe,
She needs
right?
some ladies around her helping.
And if this is a small town, there is no urgent care, there is no local doctor. What
Mm-hmm.
there are probably are midwives
Mm-hmm.
or women who have experience giving birth and the potential numerous complications
Mm-hmm.
that can come as a result of giving birth in a home,
Yeah.
right? And they're going to gather to the house. The minute they hear that Mary's going, their contractions happening, they're going to gather to the house. And they're going to want to help Mary, and they're going to kick everyone else out who's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to keep the people there to make sure that she has the safest labor as possible in the ancient world, which that's a mouthful because that's dangerous. In the ancient is dangerous now. That's
Yeah.
dangerous in the ancient world. That's
Yeah.
not an easy task.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens is that as far as we can tell archaeologically, at least in Nazareth, more so than Bethlehem, Bethlehem is less archaeology than Nazareth. But as far as we can tell from homes, the rooms were tiny.
Yeah.
They weren't very big. If the expectation is that maybe Mary, Joseph, a baby are going to sleep in a room, probably very narrow. This is not a very big space.
Right.
So where are we going to move? Okay. We're probably going to move into the larger part of the house,
Mm-hmm.
which are the first 2 floors, right? So you may still be asking me, where do we get the manger? Where do we get this
Where do we get
trough
the
that
manger?
Jesus is laid? Why is there a manger if they're not in a barn?
Right.
Well, here's the deal. Again, we bring in archaeology and what we know from the land of Israel. What we know from the land of Israel is that the bottom level of the homes were split into 2. One side was usually your oven or your tabun or whatever you had, and the things that you use, the implements that you use for your labor. So if this is Joseph's house, there's various things that he uses for masonry and such, architecture are there. If you're an agricultural person, you have all the tools for agriculture there. And on the other side, the thing that we don't often think about is that in your house in the first century, you are going to have your animals there.
Mm-hmm.
Because your animals are not for consumption.
Right.
In other words, they're not waiting to become hamburgers and goat kebabs. These are the ones that give you your milk and your various things that are going to be important to the survival of your household. As a matter of fact, as far as we know of diets in the first century, meat was few and far between in terms of food. For food, we're talking about rice, different kinds of milk, potential cheeses, legumes, okay? And those animals, you can't leave them outside. You bring them into your house. They provide warmth during the winter months because you don't have insulated cave homes or insulated homes. So they provide warmth for you, but you also need to find a place to feed them. Now, again, we turn back to archaeology, and the evidence suggests to us that in the first floor where there were animals kept, there were also a row of mangers. So your animals could feed. Okay. While you were in the sleeping room, maybe in the back room, maybe the upstairs room, they're going to be there feeding for the night. Okay. When Mary goes into labor, again, a situation where you need access to good air and you need people there that are going to help. The only place that they're going to fit, if this is how we're looking at the text, the only place they're going to fit is in that first floor where there are mangers. And the thing, for lack of a better way of saying it, the thing that most looks like a newborn bassinet is a first century manger.
Right.
Anyone's ever seen one? It's a stone rectangle with a dip in the middle. Okay. Okay, not exactly federally tested crib that you're going to get at Walmart, right? But this is going to be why we have our manger. Okay. And the reason we're going to have our manger there is because this is first century life.
Yeah.
This is how people lived.
Natural, normal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, our tradition generally pushes Jesus outside of that. Because when later interpreters were reading the text, they didn't know the realities of first century life as much as, let's say, we do now, or they weren't as concerned with understanding first century life as much as we do now. And that is a significant difference in how we read the text.
It is.
Now, I will say that people usually say, well, wasn't Jesus meant to be born in a humble environment? Well, the animal thing is still humble, right? There's no lack of humility. There's no lack of humility in the divine God of creation becoming a human being. That in and of itself is humbling.
Yeah.
Okay. The more important feature for me in all this is that we picture Jesus being born alone, right? With his family, with animals, and that shepherds join in. And then in some nativity scenes, a little drummer boy comes in, which is in no biblical text ever.
But I do like the song.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the Magi come in. But this actually paints a slightly different picture. And that picture is that Jesus is also born among family.
Yeah.
That they are family members, there are neighbors, there are communal members, which this is all Middle Eastern, the idea of community, the unity in the community, that they are welcoming him in to that community. In other words, they're not only welcoming to the Bethlehem community, they're welcoming him into the Jewish people, to the people of God.
Yeah.
That he is a member of this community, but member of also this larger nation, for which he will be so important to.
Yep.
And for me, that is incredible. The idea that Jesus is not born away from family or rejected in some traditions, I've had growing up, we have this idea that he's utterly ostracized by family. And when we look at the Luke 2 in light of the ancient world, we see that this is not the case. Jesus very much, for lack of a better way of saying it, at home.
Yeah.
He's at home with his family.
Some people like to assume he was ostracized. And I think what I love that you're painting is the everyday, natural, normal occurrence of life coming into the world. Yeah, this was the Messiah, and we know that the shepherds saw the angel and they came, and so all of that. But many assume also that Mary was ostracized and looked down on this whole time. Therefore, Jesus was. It was all done in secrecy. There was something wrong with all of it. However, I think that also comes from people maybe not understanding the betrothal process of the first century. So I know this is starting kind of back at the beginning, but can you just quickly run through that it's a two-part process of betrothal, and Mary was likely not a shunned individual during any of this experience?
No, as far as we know, she's not going to be shunned for anything that happens. I mean, the process of betrothal is, one, probably done with families coming together to choose a suitor for that person. And then there is a responsibility on the part of the man to be able to secure her livelihood.
Right.
And we have this happening in a I forget what it's called, now we have a ketubah, what's called a marriage contract that they would eventually sign during their wedding day. The betrothal itself is a commitment, right?
Right.
It's not let's see if we're gonna get married. Let's see
They're
what
already
happens.
committed.
Right. Let's see what happens in the next year or so. But rather no, we are. This is the commitment. The marriage itself, which happens somewhere between Nazareth and Bethlehem, is the consummation
Right.
of that commitment.
Yeah.
So that Joseph had already made a standing commitment to her.
Right.
Now he could have, as was suggested, sort of end that commitment
Because she was pregnant.
because she was pregnant, right?
But then an angel told him where that came from.
Right, exactly. to end that commitment, he could have chosen to do that based on the fact that she was pregnant.
Yeah.
But he chose not to. The idea that she would have been shunned is usually a misreading of how women are treated in ancient Jewish society.
Yeah.
It's just not really something that we hear about with regard to marriages.
And as far as we can read, it's likely by the time they got to Nazareth, when they left Nazareth, they were already living together in one home as a married couple, as far as the outer world could see, and then showing up in Bethlehem that way. So I think that's I just bring that up because often that's what leads into, well, Jesus must have also been shunned and things like that. But instead, like I said, I think it's a beautiful story of circumstance of a family loving each other and helping raise one another and grow together. So
absolutely,
I think it's more powerful in that way. At least for me, it takes it even closer to heart. The other thing to note is in caves that we see even today from the first century, there are actually holes in some of the walls where they would rope the animals in this bigger living area. So it just gives you this image of, well, that's got to be a donkey that was roped to that wall for sure. So it's just interesting when you just put all the reality of it together. So is there anything,
absolutely.
Yeah, is there anything else you want to mention as far as the birth goes before I ask you why it matters?
No, I think I think one of the reasons that people react so strongly to reading Luke 2 in this way is because this tradition is so dearly held.
Yeah. They grew up with it when they were little.
It's so deeply ingrained, and I completely understand that. I mean, I'm there with you.
Yeah, I know.
And for me, this unpacks it in a way that, one, does no damage to the text, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
In other words, there's nothing happening here where we're breaking pieces apart and saying, well, we just decided this afternoon, this is how we understand this
No,
passage,
this
right?
is reading the
This is
text.
this is reading the text, and
Hmm.
also trying to understand this text is not disconnected from the world in which it was created,
Right.
right? The author here, Luke, assumes that his reader is going to know what a census is. He doesn't tell us what a census is.
Hmm.
He doesn't tell us what's going on with Quirinius. Okay, he's just telling us information without giving us the small details,
Ah,
because in many ways he assumes. Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. You would wish that he gave us, like, let's get the Lucan commentary on the Lucan gospel.
Yeah. If only he'd have written that part to it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And for me, this is an incredible, at least from my personal experience, when I first heard this, an incredible eye-opening sort of thing. Like, I want to know, where else can we see these aspects when we bring in the world of Jesus? Where else?
Yeah.
We're talking about Luke 2. What about Luke 3, 4, 5?
Yeah.
What other things are there? As someone who studies it, I can tell you that there's tons.
There's so much.
There's so much great stuff
It's so
that
much
comes
fun,
out.
isn't it?
Yes.
That's why I sometimes I can't read the Bible before I go to bed because I can't sleep. I'm like,
No,
what?
there's too much going on. Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Yes.
But that's it. You're intended to wrestle with your text and read through, and uh,
Sure.
it's it's a journey of growth, and I love it. And I think that's what the center loves to do too. It's just this journey of growth that we all go along. So, Jeff, I'm going to ask you the question: why does it matter what we just talked about? Why does any of this matter?
Um, I think it matters because it matters that we understand how the gospels are put together, right? So these are our sacred texts, and this applies to Paul and the rest of the New Testament as well. But these are our sacred texts. So these are the things that we use to edify ourselves and grow in faith and know more about God. And we sometimes use that word to know God, or maybe to know Jesus, right? And the invitation in the gospels, without us maybe, or without the gospel writers being obvious about it, actually they're not obvious at all, is is to dig a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
right? To go from the shallow end of the pool to the deeper end of the pool.
Mhm.
And the way that they do that, again, I don't think they're doing this on purpose. I think they're doing it implicitly. They're implying it, is that they leave out certain details that otherwise help us to flesh out the text.
Yeah.
And they're doing that because, let's use Luke's as an example, but all the texts of the New Testament, Old Testament, have this, right? Luke is writing to Theophilus.
Mhm.
Now, you introduced me at the beginning of this video. My name is not Theophilus. And the Gospel of Luke was not written to me. It was written to an ancient individual. We don't know exactly who he was. He may have been a priest in Jerusalem, actually, but we're not sure. And Theophilus is going to know stuff about the first century world that we just don't know automatically. It just is part of life because we sit 2,000 plus years away from these amazing events taking place in the land of Israel. And God has afforded us the opportunity. We live in a time where, if we were 150 years ago, what we know now 150 years later is exponentially greater than
Yeah.
what we've known about the ancient world at any other point in history, apart from living in the first century.
Right.
We just know tons. And there are ways of learning this. There are ways of accessing this information that allows us to crack open some of these texts and just see how vibrant they are and how living they are and how
Mhm.
amazing they are to our faith. And for me, it's a it's a question of growth, that when we say we want to know Jesus, can we separate that knowing from knowing who he was when he was here? And can we separate that knowing who he was when he was here by not then knowing the places where he walked and the places where he stepped and the faith that he followed and the fish that he ate and the ways and the highways that he traveled?
Yeah.
And for me, that's a big no.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I'm going to say I'm going to know Jesus, it can't, for me, if I have the opportunity to know more about what that looks like in real life, then I'm going to want that, because the Gospels, with not telling me that information, have opened up a big invitation.
Yeah.
And for me, I want to answer that invitation.
Yeah.
And I want to know more. If I want to know Jesus, then I want to know, what did the leather sandals look like? And we actually know
We do.
that Jewish sites, we found leather sandals. See,
And
this is
the
one of
nails.
the yeah, exactly. So I think that for me, that's why it matters. It's a matter of not simply, I'm an academic, right? So part of it is the intellectual search for me, right? I want to know this, I want to know that. But part of that is also very much close to who I am as a person of faith. Like, how do I grow as a person of faith? Is it simply reading the scriptures, or reading the scriptures in light of the world in which they were created?
Yeah.
And for me, we learned this from a professor that we had. For us, the principle of the incarnation, the nativity, which is where we celebrate the incarnation, that's it right there, that God chose to become flesh in a specific time, specific place, specific language, specific things, and that God expects us to engage those things as well.
Yeah.
Because that's when he chose to come in flesh. He didn't choose any other time.
Find out everything we can about it.
If he chose Shakespearean England,
I'm there.
we should want to know about Shakespearean England. Exactly. Also be a shorter trip by plane. But yeah, it's all, for me, it's a matter of honoring the incarnation.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's why it matters. I love it. I guess what we do, I love sitting down with Jeff across the table, because it's just ask questions and questions and questions, and read the text and ask questions of the text. And it's a good thing to do. It's iron sharpening iron, going back and forth and saying, you don't know what you're talking about. It's like, no, Amy, you don't know what you're talking about. But I love it. It's just this great interaction. And Jeff, I'm so thankful for you, just for who you are in every way. And as far as understanding the text, part of this is going to be put on what the center is doing as far as a new resource center. And Jeff will have some courses on there coming. And so that'll come out. The resource center will probably come out early in the year, and then the courses will be added along the way. And so we're really excited for that. And it will just be accessible to everyone to be able to learn more and dig in more, because a lot of times when people go on our trips, they say, well, now what do you want me to do? Because you've just sort of opened these cracks for us, and how do we dive into them? And it is kind of a hard one to respond to sometimes. So this is going to help lead people along. Another way that we can do this is Jeff can show up to wherever you are if you can catch him in his schedule.
Absolutely.
He's awesome to have invited to your church or your schools for a weekend or for a week of teaching. Invite your community. It would be a brilliant idea to have. Again, I'll put his contact information, but we also have a speakers page on our website for the center where we can put you in contact with Jeff. And I think anybody, and I already know because I've spent years and years with him, but teaching or understanding how Jeff teaches through the land is really an unbelievable experience. People are blessed beyond when they travel with him and when they sit under his teaching and his courses. And it really is a gift that you have, but it's not just ending there. It's because you marry your faith with it. If you didn't have this part going along with your education, then I have a harder time probably listening. But when you are living the same way that you're teaching, it makes all the difference in the world to me. And so I just thank you for that. but I think anyone would be blessed to have Jeff along, and that's my very biased, but everyone else's unbiased opinion, who has ever traveled with him. And so I'll put all the links in the email that will go out with the video. And Jeff, I just want to say thank you so much for taking time to
Oh,
do
thank you.
this,
You know, I
and for
love this.
hanging out with us so much, and
Yeah,
walking us through Luke 2
my
and
pleasure.
the importance of the birth of Jesus and understanding it. And he's super cool. You and Jesus, but I was talking about Jesus.
Him a
But
little bit more. Him a little bit more.
yeah, a little bit more. So I really appreciate it, Jeff.
I appreciate you guys having me. You know, it's
Yeah,
special to spend time with you and talk about the Bible, and the fact this can go forward and bless people during
it will.
Christmas is a huge deal.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. Say bye to Jeff, and you'll see
Bye.
him on the backside.